is Margaret Yancey, or Marge. I'm a senior analyst at AHI, and I am currently based out of the Boston office.
I'm Sanjana Sidhra. I am also a senior analyst at AHI, based out of the Boston office as well.
So my favorite project at AHI so far has been the housing diagnostic that we did for the World Bank in the Maldives. We did this from 2020 until 2021. It was a lot of different things within this project, but most essentially it was a housing market diagnostic, as well as evaluating government programs, assessing affordability levels amongst households, and providing policy recommendations and creating a roadmap for the government of the Maldives to implement recommendations to improve the housing sector. So the reason that I chose this project as one of my favorites is because, well, first, it was the first project I ever worked on from start to finish at AHI. And second, it was a really interesting look into how the type of government and how the topography of a specific place really influences how housing protection happens. One of the interesting things that we did specifically within the housing market study was we looked at the various institutions at play, the type of government that the Maldives had. So it's a decentralized government. So all of the functions and capacities of the government was centered out from the central government to more local government. So you'd have the central government in Malé, but then there's also the islands and there's the atolls, which are island clusters. And so there's different levels of government for that. One thing that was very interesting is that in decentralized governments, a lot of times these policies are relatively recent, and the decentralized entities at the more local level don't necessarily have the technical capacity or financial capacity to carry out the objectives or activities that they've been assigned. So for example, in the case of the Maldives, the government decentralized out land use planning to the more local government counterparties and made it their responsibility, but they may not necessarily have planning staff in their local governments. So that was very interesting. And also incorporating elements of the topography. A lot of these local governments are very spread out because they're on different islands. So it'll be a 2-hour boat ride between different islands, and you need an even further boat ride to the central government as you go out. So resource flows, financial flows, all are impacted by this archipelago type situation.
Favorite project that I worked on at AHI was a project we did in Vietnam for the International Finance Corporation, or the IFC. This project was focused on finding solutions to increase property ownership by women in Vietnam. Why I find this project interesting is because it has another added dimension of gender financial inclusion to the basic housing consulting expertise that we already have. So that meant we had to update our methodologies of analyzing markets and producing solutions to include gender component. We had to analyze data and kind of disaggregate it by gender, which is not something that we tend to do in other projects because they look more at the market as one. So that was really interesting. On a personal level, it was interesting to kind of assess the financial markets, the housing markets from a gender perspective and actually see how much difference there is in between, the male versus female when you're analyzing these things for gender. Another reason why I really like the project is because at the start, the clients did come to us with a fairly clear idea of the solution, the type of solution they wanted. So they did want a financial solution which incentivizes property ownership by women. So based on an initial sort of market assessment, we as AHI, as a consultant team, realized that the solutions that the client was wanting was not really going to address the issues that we discovered through our assessment. So our assessment mainly brought out that the gender issues that exist in Vietnam are mostly cultural and based in sort of gender bias norms like inheritance, etc., which is why we see such disparate rates of property ownership existing in Vietnam. But clients thought that a financial incentive could kind of remedy that, but because the barriers were not financial or access to finance, we thought the solutions was probably not in line of that. What we suggested instead that the IFC do is to try and approach the problem, but approach it from kind of access to funding for businesses. Because what happens in Vietnam is that a lot of the women, especially the income sector that we were targeting, tend to work as informal businesses, and they are unable to access credit for their businesses and build assets for their businesses that they can then have ownership of. So we thought instead of kind of focusing on residential ownership and property titles for women, if you kind of expand the scope and say sort of access to credit for business as well as home is probably a better way to approach the gender disparity as far as property issues are concerned in Vietnam.